And this guy went out of his way to say that they were definitely extraterrestrial. And I couldn't help but think about your book and your take on the whole subject. And it just seemed to me incongruous, even for Nexus, to put something as uninteresting as that in their magazine.
Well, there are things about the fireballs, what they call the fireballs, Feuerball, which Kugelblitz is the German word they use to fire lightning, basically, would mean, which indicate they were manned aircraft. And yet you get a whole misinformational network that insists that there's some sort of little bitty balls like this. Well, the thing about a ball that's peculiar is when you see a ball shape, you can't tell how far away it is from you or how large it is.
Sure.
If you're inside that ball, it looks much larger than it is. If you're on the outside of the ball, it tends to look smaller. That's something I discovered when I built the geodesic dome. And from the outside, it looked a lot smaller, but when you were inside, it was huge.
So spheres have a problem with reference to scale.
Yeah, they tend to shrink.
In the open environment.
But it would only take, with the kind of technology that's used in flying saucer propulsion, it would only take a 4-foot ball to get a small person and the power system and everything inside. And the thing about the fireballs that tells you that they're man-made and that they're not robot ships that are energy projected from the ground is the fact that they followed the bombers and did all kinds of little maneuvers that would be far away from any ground base that could be doing the controlling. So they basically had to have a man on board to do that, probably a boy, probably in the Hitler Jugend, trained just for this purpose. And their main purpose was to disrupt the communications and it was like a red herring, the distraction, because they were bombing the heck out of Germany at the time they got these things into
and the fact
sky.
that the electromagnetic radiation that they would create would disrupt circuits, wouldn't they, if
yes.
they got close by?
Yeah, they don't need any special technology. I've got article upon article written about how this technology worked to disrupt the communications, and I've got news for them. It takes no special technology. The flying saucer's propulsion system will disrupt communications
Absolutely.
if it comes close to them.
Even in the extraterrestrial literature that they like to give us, cars still burn out, cars stall out and start up later when the thing passes by, things of that nature.
My father was helped for between 15 minutes and a half hour by one of these ships outside Levelland, Texas, in 1957, and he said nothing about it to me, and it wasn't until I turned on the morning news that I realized that his car lights were all burned out. He had to have them replaced, and that's when I realized that he'd had this experience with the ship. And so I went down to the Ford Motor plant in Odessa, Texas, Ford Motor house where they sold the cars and fixed them, and walked up to him and I said, "Why didn't you say you saw a flying saucer?" And he said, "Well, how did you know about it?" And I said, "I just turned on the morning news, and there were a lot of people that had experiences last night." And the mechanic said, "This is the first time I've ever seen all the lights on a car burned out and not one blown fuse."
He hasn't seen too many UFO-related car problems.
The Germans were building dozens of weapons from Tesla's papers. And
including something that might be called a Foo Fighter?
Yes. And the Schildkröte, the Fliegende Schildkröte was a flying turtle, which is just another name for a type of Foo Fighter, except that what I've found is that there are several different types of ships. One is a linear, what I call a linear type of ship, and then the other one is a round ship. And the linear ships have a different control system for turning them, whereas the round ships turn in a number of directions. And they turn peripherally. They can go backwards, forwards, right, left, whereas the linear ships tend to turn their one end in the direction of travel, maybe two directions in case of some of the cigar-shaped ships. But this particular type, the flying turtle type, appeared to be the kind that I saw in the U.S. Air Force intelligence films that were made over Germany in World War II. And I have heard various references to these things that they were unmanned and all this kind of stuff, and that just wasn't true. No, they had a pilot. You could see the cockpit
It
glinting.
would seem more difficult to have remote-controlled devices in the time period that we're talking about than it would to have an actual pilot,
Yeah.
which in their minds would be expendable.
Well, the film that I saw had some humor. You could laugh if you saw it because the ship.
You're describing a gun camera
Yes.
footage that you had seen?
Yes, well,
when
it
you
was
were-
actually the camera operator was behind the gunners. Ordinarily, they mount a camera on guns that takes photos as they shoot, but in this case, the camera operator was behind the gunners, and it was in the side bay with, I presume, a 50 caliber machine gun that slid back and forth on this rack that they had it on. And as the plane flew along, the Foo Fighter or Flying Turtle was flying in a spiral pathway around the plane like this, very fast. And for comparison for speed, in the picture you see a Messerschmitt 263E, which is a rocket plane, it's a disposable rocket plane, flying around over here trying to get a shot with its 20 millimeter cannon. And at one point you see the pilot jettison the plane and bails out, and the plane goes down. They were disposable planes made out of plywood.
So both of these, the rocket fighter that you're talking about, and the turtle fighter, I'm just calling them Foo Fighters, were buzzing around this bomber. All
Yeah,
at the same time?
presumably the Foo Fighter was to distract the gunner while the Messerschmitt guy comes in and shoots him with a cannon. That was the strategy. They didn't have any weapons on the Foo Fighters. Didn't appear like there was any weapons on board.
I see. So they were either going to try one or the other.
And
the Foo Fighter being probably there to, if it could get close enough, disrupt the ignition system,
They
or
couldn't-
if the rocket fighter could get a shot in.
The gunner couldn't get a shot, even though he had some tracers in his rounds. You could see him. He'd swing the gun over here, and the Foo Fighter would come around like this, and as soon as it come into view, he'd start trying to get a shot, but he couldn't give enough lead. He couldn't move the gun fast
Right.
enough. By that time, he's out of sight. So then he starts pulling his gun over here and waiting for it. And so that as soon as he sees it pop into view, he can pull the trigger and get a lead on it. But he still couldn't. I didn't see any hits. But it was. You can compare the speed of this Foo Fighter and know that it was flying in a spiral path several times faster than the Messerschmitt, which had a speed of over 500 miles an
And
hour.
there was an awareness from the pilot that it was being shot at and it was trying to avoid.
Yes.
Now, people would listen to this and they're going, my God, I thought Foo Fighters were just some fleeting thing that somebody saw, a couple of times while they're flying their B-17, and now you're talking about, actual air-to-air combat with these gadgets. Obviously, in the mix, fighting a war, then if the question would arise, I guess, that if they had these miracle weapons, let's call it that for now, why didn't they just throw everything they had at the B-17 and just wipe out the entire fleet? They could obviously outmaneuver. They could obviously, do all kinds of things to just basically turn off a B-17 and mid-flight. Why didn't they win the war?
I think they had there were a number of things involved. First of all, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what was going on in World War II anyway. For one thing, the Germans didn't really let loose and bomb England. They could have sent bombers over there and decimated the place. They didn't do that. They believed that they would eventually get the English as allies. The purpose
Even while they were at
yes,
World War with this country?
all they intended to do was carry on a terror bombing in England to terrorize them, to force them to fall into line with them and back them against Russia. They actually believed to the very end that eventually England would see the light and join with them to fight Russia.
Do you think there was anything, in your opinion, behind the scenes of the conventional politics of Hitler was this lone nut who initiated World War II, and we are entitled to only blame him? Are you of the opinion there's something more to that?
Well, there's a big industrial plan. I mean, the thing that I came up with in the book that's very controversial, I'm sure, and I'd heard about it for years, and I'd heard about something called Morgenthau's pastoral policy, and I had heard that it was a forgery. It was supposedly a plan to exterminate the Germans under the Treaty of Versailles. Now, I thought it was curious that there was a second Morgenthau's pastoral policy in World War II, which was authored by Hans Morgenthau's son, or Hans Morgenthau Jr. had authored that plan in World War II, and that was a plan of denazification after the war was over. Whereas the first Morgenthau's pastoral plan, as I found out later, actually turned out to be factual.